we are talking about Jupiter when it turns direct. We sometimes call this stationary direct because it's standing still when it turns direct. And we abbreviate that as D. Here's Jupiter's cycle. Notice that Jupiter's cycle is not quite as long as the cycle for Saturn that we looked at yesterday. Or, well, actually, we recorded the video yesterday. You may not look at it yesterday. From March 27th this year to January 9th, 2022. And it moves 10 degrees. It moves further in its retrograde cycle. The faster a planet moves, the more degrees it goes through in its retrograde cycle.
Right.
And it does it in less time. The slower a planet moves, the longer the retrograde cycle and a smaller number of degrees. So It has a smaller range because it's moving slower, but because of the way the sun and the planets work together, it takes more of the year, the slower it is. It's retrograde more of the year. When you get planets out far enough, they are retrograde for half a year, maybe even a little more than that.
Right.
So this is Jupiter. And as always, this line across here is when it is moving direct, same way it normally moves, but it's slowing down and getting ready to go retrograde. Here's the retrograde point. Now it's moving backwards through the retrograde period to this point where it turns around again, moves direct, and that's the point we're talking about. And then it goes forward again. So it goes forward twice and backs up once. And then it goes on around and back up here to where it reaches the same degree it went retrograde at. See, here's the retrograde degree. Here's the retrograde degree up here. The beginning is a degree it went direct at. The direct degree is the earliest point because see, it's just backed up all this distance. So the direct degree is the earliest point. The retrograde degree is the furthest or latest point of that particular cycle. Okay, now, and here's something fun about Jupiter. See these little yellow boxes here?
Yep.
Jupiter goes retrograde when it's trine the sun.
And is that just this particular retrograde cycle, or is that always?
Nope, that's the way it is. Jupiter goes retrograde when it's trine the sun because Jupiter, it has to do with the way the sun and Jupiter are aligned. And Jupiter moves faster, of course, than Saturn or any of the others out there beyond Saturn. And it just doesn't take as 2/3 of Jupiter's cycle is direct. Only 1/3 of it, from one trine to the next trine, only 1/3 of it is retrograde. For Saturn, that's not true. Saturn is moving up toward turning retrograde. It's like 20 days after the square, but it's closer to the square. It's not at the retrograde for Saturn. And you'll see when we look at this for Pluto, it's right close to the opposition.
Very cool. That's a good way to look at the planets and the timing of the planets.
So it's kind of nice because Jupiter has to do with the growth and expansion cycle.
Right.
And that's what we're going to talk about here. The energy of growth and expansion has been stagnant and is now shifting into motion out in the world to bring the potential for active growth in your activities in the world. And so basically, you know, when Jupiter's direct, you've got a business, it's going to tend, you're making plans, they go, they materialize, you get this new thing going, you expand this way or the other. Then when Jupiter hits retrograde, the things you're trying to expand, a lot of times they fall apart. It's like everything turns inward and has to be reevaluated. So during that third of the year, when Jupiter's retrograde, things aren't going to expand out in the world quite the same way. You're having to go like inside and correct anything under the surface that might have interfered, any faults in the foundation or something like that. And so actually things you're working on will sometimes fall apart as Jupiter goes retrograde, but it's okay. Because all Jupiter's saying is, hey, you made some mistakes in here and it's going to go better if you fix them. And so that third of the year is time to regroup, make it better, figure out how to be more effective with it. And then it should really take off after Jupiter goes direct.
Right. That's a good idea of understanding how to plan things in your life to be able to think about, well, what can I expand on? And then as Jupiter goes direct, to move forward to actually implement those. So it's a good way to look at it. Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so here's a chart for when Jupiter, the moment Jupiter turns around. This is the first second it was direct, folks. We figured it out.
So the second.
Yeah. And so this chart, whenever we're looking at a chart, now remember transits operate a bit different. This is transits. This is a transiting pattern. The way it impacts your natal chart is a bit different than the way natal planets operate. Right now, we're not talking about that. We'll get into it one of these days, but right now we're not talking about it. We're just looking at the pattern in the sky. This is what everybody experiences, the same pattern. Now it'll be turned around in the wheel at different angles, depending on where in the world you are, but it's the same exact pattern. Notice that we have this interesting conjunction down here. We have Mercury, Mars, and the Sun. Now, Mercury, Mars, and the Sun are all conjunct each other, and this is in the natal chart of the transit. And remember, the transit, the Sun and Jupiter are especially emphasized because Jupiter is turning direct related to the Sun, and notice they're trying each other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Mars is also trine there. Now, Mercury over here is actually lightly conjunct the Sun. It's really too far out to feel a whole lot in a natal chart. Okay. But also look what we've got here. Sun, Mars, and Haumea. Okay, what this means is this Jupiter direct should be especially charged because Haumea is about rebirth, a fresh, delightful new beginning. It's about birth and rebirth and the process of a new impetus coming into the world like a fresh dawn, like a new beginning. Haumea is so beautiful. And it's right with the Sun and Mars. So this talks about new kinds of actions, expansive actions, because that's Mars and the Sun with Jupiter. Jupiter's trine at a point right in between the Sun and Mars. Haumea is about the action. It is too far away to be, I don't have Haumea aspected, but if it were aspected, it would not show a trine to the Sun. So Haumea is simply talking about the Mars and the Sun and new actions, a rethinking or a rebirth of your actions in a new way.
It's interesting too, because on that day, but it's later in the day, Mercury actually turns retrograde too. I think it's 11.
No, it doesn't. Oh, you mean it turns direct?
Oh yeah, my mistake. Direct, not retrograde. Right.
I was going, that's September 27th.
Yeah, no, I knew that too. But yeah, it is interesting because Mercury also does turn direct that day. So there's a lot going on. And
so there's this release of energy in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, poof. Here we are. There's also Haumea and Eris are in opposition to each other. They move so slow that they are in opposition to each other for a long time.
Right.
And in oppositions in vibrational astrology, we allow 8 degrees. We prefer to cut it down some in transits, but even so, this is 4 degrees between Haumea and Eris. But look at Pluto. Pluto is exactly square Eris. Okay, so
going back to the Sun.
So the Sun and Haumea are opposite Eris. Pluto is strongly square the Sun. You can see that in the aspects, but that's a T-square. And so what does this mean? There's a general theme right now. We probably should do a video on this specifically, Starlene. Haumea has a long-term opposition to Eris in this time period. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, as I said, Haumea is about birth. It's about rebirth. It's about this beautiful new beginning. But Eris opposite it says there's something required for that to happen. And this is, of course, the opposition has to do with your relationships with other people, that there needs to be no blockages, that there needs to be a clear linkage on all levels with other people. So when you're cutting people off, when you're not really letting yourself interact openly with them, this new beginning is not going to happen. That's what Eris says, that it requires this open flowing spirit.
Very nice. And so Pluto connecting with Haumea and Eris in this chart would give it a compulsive.
It makes it compulsive and intensive and very intense. And it also, Eris in general, tends to attack any blockages.
Would you say it's really personal too, because the Sun is mixed in with this T-square as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely personal because the Sun is in there. Well, it's in the daily life.
Right.
Okay. And the Pluto, Eris is already really intense and kind of Pluto-like. And when you add Pluto to Eris,
yeah,
you've got just a double whammy.
Right.
Something new has to happen. The blocks are being attacked, and they are, if they don't give, there's going to be some real problems. Because what happens is Eris pushes against the blocks, and Pluto is going to intensify her push. And this is where Eris gets her name for being chaos. Because if you fight her and you don't open up, then it gets really chaotic.
So it's like an opening, time for an opening and a shift during this Jupiter station direct time. Very interesting. Very cool. It's exciting to see how that will play out on the global stage too.
Yes, it is. We'll have to watch and see.
Yes, we will.
Okay, so here are the midpoints and isotrope that are really strongly concentrated. Jupiter is at Neptune, Pluto, which, as I've said in the notes here, is about intense growth. Okay, let's look at it in the chart. There's Jupiter and Neptune, Pluto. So Jupiter's at the midpoint between Neptune, Pluto. Oh, and that's the third thing to talk about. Mars, Neptune, quincunx. An adjustment in the way you act based on your dreams. Remember, this is not the way we would read it in the natal chart. This is a transit reading.
Right.
Okay, so that Jupiter at Neptune, Pluto, expansion of passion. Big sense of passion. And the isotrope, that's the box in orange down below, is Sun, Saturn, Mercury, Jupiter, seeing the big picture of what is truly essential. This on a daily basis.
Right.
So the Saturn, what's really essential, particularly this is the natal chart, Mercury, Jupiter, the big picture, and the sun on a daily basis. Here is the vibrational pattern for this stationary direct point. And we have vibration 13 and 19 as the strongest of the first 32 vibrations in the chart. Okay, so here's 13. This is a pretty powerful chart, actually. If you look here at these green lines that are making a rectangle, notice the rectangle joins Saturn and Venus with both the sun and the moon, and it opposes Uranus. We've got this actually 5-planet rectangle because Saturn and Venus are less than a degree apart. So this is a powerful pattern. This is called a mystic rectangle sometimes. You have two oppositions crossing each other, Uranus opposite Saturn, Venus, and Sun opposite Moon. Now, the Sun opposite Moon says this is a very personal, emotional structure. This is about, on mundane levels, this is about the people. Venus, Saturn opposite Uranus, creating a new kind of beauty, forming a new pattern, going away that has not been gone before. And the Mars here on that sun moon, the sun moon is the very personal impact on people, and the Mars has it energized. And we know from the natal chart that this is about, that we've got a sense of something new being born. I think this represents, now 13, you have to remember what 13 means. And I almost forgot to mention that. 13 is about the special essence within each person. So I think that on a mundane level, it's kind of about everybody's important. About doing things that help people sense and go down in and become aware of their own specialness and value.
So this is the 13 vibe on the Jupiter station direct, and it does have a powerful energy to it. Although Jupiter isn't involved in this pattern, it's just kind of striking that chord, so to speak, of what's going on during this time.
It's true that it's not involved, but look at what we've got there. We have Jupiter conjuncts Pluto.
Right.
So what that means is that Jupiter is in a 13th, is 1/13 from Pluto in the natal chart. So there's a 13 between them. It doesn't form a 3-planet pattern, but there's just this sense of intense growth.
Right.
Yeah, let's look at what we've got here. We don't have any strong midpoints. We usually want a midpoint to be under 15 minutes, for sure under 30 minutes to focus it in a transit chart.
Right.
But we do have a couple of isotraps, and they've been marked in different colors just so you can tell them apart. These are this one is 22 minutes, the red one, and the green one is 24 minutes. They're less than 30 minutes, so they're active and having some influence. Remember that 13 is a special, unique essence within each person. The red isotrap has to do with, it's got Uranus, Pluto, Moon, and Mars. So that is sudden, intense emotional actions about the unique essence within people.
Right, because that's the 13.5 that brings that 13.5 into it. Mm-hmm.
And the other pattern, the green pattern, is slightly less strong, and it has Sun, Mercury, Jupiter, Pluto. So this is, again, notice Pluto is in both of these. That intensity here is just yelling at us. Daily intense awareness of the big picture. So again, we have this sense of a special, unique essence that exists, that we are all that is coming into daily awareness. How does each of us fit into the big picture? How are we an important part of the big picture? That's the kind of thing focused here. The other vibration that is strong is 19. And 19 has to do with taking the patterns you're looking at around you, taking them inside, evaluating them in great depth, figuring out what's strong and what's weak about them, figuring out how to express them in the way that you think would be most effective, and then going out and guiding other people in doing that. So it has this, I'll figure it out and then we'll get together and make it work kind of idea to it. It is about directing things, but it's based on deep inner considerations first. And those of you that are kind of in astrology here will notice that there's a grand trine kite, and it's 4 planets, Saturn, Pluto, Moon, and Mercury. Saturn, Pluto, and Moon are trine, and Mercury is opposing the Pluto, forming the kite. Neptune is tacked on. It's not part of the kite, but Neptune and Pluto are trine Saturn and opposed to Mercury. So, but Neptune is not connected to the moon, so it can't be part of the grand trine. In this case, well, you start with the trine. Moon, Saturn, Pluto. This can be a bit difficult. This is about looking at your emotional patterns, looking at the places where you're getting upset, but it really isn't worth it, where you're letting things that are trivial that you won't remember in 10 minutes upset you. And what Saturn and Pluto are saying here is you need to learn to not get upset about things that really aren't that big a deal. Things that if you won't remember why you were upset in an hour, it is not worth getting upset.
Right.
And then the Mercury comes in on this and says, use your head. Think about it. Remind your emotions. That really doesn't matter. So they're in a bad mood. That's not you. You don't have to let it affect you, infect you. So, anyway, so this is about letting go and shifting yourself emotionally. So, since this is 19, this would be about analyzing your emotional patterns and figuring out what really works to help you reach your goals and what is working to your detriment.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Right.
And allowing that to the movement of Jupiter forward, allowing that to let go of those things that are not working for you, having maybe a new mindset, so to speak, because we do have Mercury and Jupiter in there too. So that kind of brings us a new perspective, perhaps.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And then there's a T-square, which is really a pretty powerful punch. Because if you look down at the bottom of the chart, see the Venus, Uranus. Okay, the T-square is Mercury opposed to Saturn and Pluto. And then the focus of it is down here at the bottom of the chart, and it's Venus and Uranus. But look at where Eris is.
Yeah.
Eris is sitting right on Venus in the 19th vibration, 7 minutes apart. That's super, super tight. So this is, I couldn't ignore it. If I had been 4 or 5 degrees away, I wouldn't need to think about it so much. But this is on Venus. And it's about, because it's on Venus, it's about attraction to beauty. And how are you blocking your attraction? How are you keeping the attraction to beauty is also about attracting beauty to you. It's Venus is both. She's both you being attracted to people and you being the attractor, the one who attracts. So in both cases, you can block things from coming to you, people from coming to you. You can block either way. You can not attract things. You can keep things from being attracted to you. Eris is talking about those blocks and letting go of them. And this is with Uranus. This is in the moment. Just being free and open in the moment allows you to pursue your dreams in a systematic, well thought out way, and sneak in this Jupiter here, seeing the big picture of how what you're doing fits in with everybody else. Okay, and now we've got some midpoints. We have 2 midpoints and 1 isotrap. I'm going to talk about the midpoints first and then the isotrap. You got the strongest midpoint is Mercury at Moon, Saturn. And that is, remember, this is a mundane chart. Moon Mercury is about history as well as about psychological, personal patterns. It's how the past affects the present, thinking about that, analyzing that, figuring out the truth of it. That's what I have down here, intense analysis of the truth of history and what is really going on psychologically as people respond to their personal and social history. And then you've got another one, Pluto, in the middle between the Moon and Saturn. This is about evaluating how to get better results. Remember, we talked about Moon, Saturn, figuring out which emotional patterns really serve you and letting go of the ones that don't. There is a corollary to that. If you don't let go of them, you tend to get depressed. So it's good to let go of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so now let's look at that midpoint. Here it is. Moon, Uranus equals Mars, Neptune. And this is 1 minute, folks. This is the strongest midpoint pattern in there. You've got Uranus and Neptune This is sensitivity and insight. It's also about impulsive actions related to dreams. With Mars in there, there's a potential for violent actions based on dreams, visions, and beliefs that are not Neptune, that are not necessarily connected to reality.
Wow, and that's really a strong one. It's only 1 minute apart.
Yeah. Now, this is about evaluation. Remember, this is 19. This is evaluation down inside about, in a sense, what's really important and how to be effective with it, and then going and doing it. So in a way, this is about figuring out how to, when you take all these together, you see this is kind of about figuring out ways to build better patterns. And so that's the Jupiter is turning direct. And there's a lot of stuff here about turning your patterns, becoming more effective with your personal patterns. Okay, that's the Jupiter stationary direct. That's Jupiter turning direct. And now the Sabian symbols. Okay. When it turns direct, energy is released for growth and expansion in the world. And just a reminder, Sabian, all the rest of that was vibrational astrology. This isn't. Okay, now, when we start looking at the stationary direct, we've been looking at the exact moment when Jupiter turns direct, but this is actually a period of time. Jupiter is when something turns retrograde or when it turns direct, it appears to slow down in the sky. You have to slow to a stop to change directions, at least for a second. And that's what it looks like the planets do. And they stay in one area for a long time because they are in this slow down, stop, and turn process. So what I'm showing you here, because we're looking at the Sabian symbols, we're looking at a particular description of a degree of the zodiac. And how long does Jupiter stay in that place? Well, the natal chart turning direct, Jupiter went into 23 of, is going into 23 of Aquarius on September 29th. That's why we're doing this video now, folks. We're doing it right before Jupiter goes into the degree where it's going to be stationary and turn around. And it's going to sit in 23 of Aquarius from September 29th to November 7th. That's a long time to sit in one area. So for those of you that are astrologers, if you've got something that's in 23 of Aquarius or that aspects it, particularly within a degree of 22 Aquarius 20, then you're going to get Jupiter on it for a long time. And it's probably really worth thinking about because Jupiter is kind of turning around. So after Jupiter goes direct, after October 18th, you're going to be able to do something expansive with that thing Jupiter's sitting on. This is the natal chart. Remember, we are looking at the 13th vibration for the soul intent. And that is 21. It's 20 of Scorpio 17, but that's for Sabian symbols. That's the 21st degree of Scorpio. And that's from October 12th to October 23rd. Again, like we're talking about 11 days. Yeah, that pattern is in there and it's kind of intense. You'll see it. And then the third one is the spirit lesson to learn. And that's going to be focused for 2.5 days about. From October 16th to October 19th. Now, in a previous video we looked at, the spirit lesson was only 4 hours. It just depends on how the geometry is working. But that's 24 of Cancer. So let's look at, this gives you an idea of the time periods we're talking about. And now let's look at what the Sabian symbols can tell us. And remember, the Sabian symbols are like oracles. They can be kind of obscure. They're symbolic. They do not take them literally. They go to extremes. It doesn't mean that you're going to be operating at that extreme. It tells you the best possibility and the most dysfunctional possibility connected with this symbol. All right?
All right.
Okay. Now, this is the natal chart. Well, this is all three. This is a behavioral expression in the natal chart, the soul intent in 13, and the spirit lesson to learn in 169. You are opening up to new responses that have not seemed natural to you in the past, finding new modes of self-expression. You know, I find fascinating, Starlene, I was not thinking about this when I was reading those vibrations. And yet this is very similar to what the chart for Mercury turning direct said.
Jupiter.
For Jupiter turning direct. Thank you.
Yes.
Isn't that
very interesting? Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And you always use so everyone knows, and if you're not familiar with Sabian symbols, when you have a Sabian symbol, you use, since it's 22 Aquarius, 20 minutes, you would use 23 as the Sabian symbol. So you always
right, and that's only in the natal chart. The specific degrees will be listed on the individual symbols. This is based on the 13th vibration of 22 Aquarius 20 and the 169th vibration for the soul intent and the spirit lesson.
Right.
Okay, so, and the soul intent is you're finding yourself trapped in rigid patterns of duty and obligation that you can no longer tolerate and maintain your personal integrity. So you stop operating within these previously binding structures. And the spirit lesson to learn, you're dealing with competing demands for your time and attention, learning to organize and exploit your potentials in ways that maximize your opportunities. Here is the problems that you can have connected with this. When you open yourself up to a new response, the alternative is to just sacrifice a true sense of yourself to please those around you. This is whether you can become move into a true sense of yourself or not. Okay. The problem in the soul intent is allowing duty and obligation to others to define you, where you do what is expected of you without evaluation. And the problem in the spirit lesson is to just feel torn apart and pulled by all the competing needs of others, so much so that you have to go and withdraw, and you feel this sense of incompetence and estrangement from everything around you as you go and you hide from everything. Okay, so let's look at this by individual symbols. The natal chart pattern, 23 of Aquarius, is the symbol, a big bear sitting down and waving all its paws. I love that symbol.
Yeah.
You are opening yourself up to new responses that have not seemed natural to you in the past, finding new modes of self-expression. Or you are sacrificing a true sense of yourself to please those around you. Now, this is for the whole period from September 29th to November 7th. This energy is going to be sitting there. Now, here's the 13th vibration, which seems to be the soul intent behind this. Okay, so you've got the personal pattern of opening yourself up to new responses this shows the soul issue. Whether you allow yourself to be trapped in rigid patterns of duty and obligation that are not you, that you can't tolerate, whether you stop it in order to maintain your personal integrity, or you allow duty and obligation to others to define you when it's not really who and what you are. That's a soul lesson, to learn to be true to what's with the soul intent is that this challenge will help you learn to be true to who you truly are, to operate out of personal integrity. And the spirit lesson underneath it is, you know, in a sense, this, when you think of these three symbols together, the competing demands could be seen as the things other people want you to do versus what's really inside of you. That's being true to yourself. That's one way to understand this. So, learn how to organize and exploit your potentials in ways that maximize your opportunities, rather than just seeing everything pull at you all at once and feeling like you can't handle it anymore and you're going to go crawl in a hole. So, and feel like you're incompetent and estranged from everybody. So by learning to operate out of your personal integrity and stay engaged, you can pick what you do about the demands coming from around you in relation to who you truly are. And then you expand. That's what Jupiter says.
Yeah, so it's like we're getting this, I know it's a shorter amount of time, but we're getting this little bit of time to deconstruct ourselves in some way and then rebuild with the longer amount of time in the first symbol that you showed us.
Right. It's like things get more and more concentrated. More of the energy gets focused into this point. And that October 16th to 19th period, remember that it's stationary direct on the 18th. So that 16 to 19 period is when it all comes to a crux.
Well, thank you so much, Linda, for sharing that with us. It was great to do a video with you again.
Well, thank you, Starlene. I mean, I couldn't do it without you.